Okay, here we go. Stand by. 3, 2, 1, action.
Assume nothing.
Brash, bald-faced blasphemy.
Question everything.
I find it extremely hard to imagine.
Open your eyes.
It is quite all right to be an atheist.
The fastest growing group of people in the country has been measured as being those who have no belief or who are atheists.
You don't have to be apologetic or quiet about it.
Challenge the opposition.
You see religion on 100 fronts losing the argument.
And start thinking. This is The Thinking Atheist Worldwide.
Today's going to be a good one. I have a panel of very special guests joining me for this broadcast, Women Beyond Belief, Women in Secular Activism. Dr. Karen Garst, she is the author of the book Women Beyond Belief, Discovering Life Without Religion. I've got Dr. Abby Hafer. She's an educator. She teaches human anatomy and physiology, and she has authored a book that just destroys creationism and the idea of intelligent design. Her book is called The Not-So-Intelligent Designer, Why Evolution Explains the Human Body and Intelligent Design Does Not. And finally, I've got Wendy Marsman. Wendy escaped a hardcore fundamentalist Christian background. She escaped. And now she is host of the Women Beyond Belief podcast. And so they're going to join me for over an hour. We're just going to chat about kind of whatever comes up. But specifically, we're going to be addressing women in atheist and secular activism, the challenges and opportunities before them. And I think you're going to find this a hugely informative and entertaining and compelling exchange. So it's coming up in just a second. Next Tuesday, I am releasing my speech I've been giving around the country for several months now. It's about the satanic panic of the late 70s, throughout the 80s, and up to the mid-90s, the satanic panic. And when I tell people the speech title, sometimes they're like, oh, that's really heavy, that's really dark. But the truth is, it is loaded with laughs, okay? And I got a great video recording of the speech recently at the Florida Free Thought Conference, and I'm releasing that to YouTube and to Blog Talk Radio. I'm releasing the audio and the video of it next week as the podcast. And it's a ride through some of the craziest stuff they told us was satanic. Some of the toys and the music and the games and the pop culture stuff that they were convinced were tools of Satan come to destroy our children. And so I'm releasing that next week. I think you are going to have a blast. So look for the links on YouTube, look for the podcast as well, and buckle up because you're going to go back in time. And you're going to see some serious insanity in the name of religion during the satanic panic, okay? Before I get into today's conversation, I'm going to begin that conversation by speaking with Karen Garst first. She and I sort of began the dialogue about her book, Women Beyond Belief. So she and I are going to talk, and then I'll bring the rest of the panel in. But what happens when we get into addressing women's issues or the issues relating to any demographic? Whether it's gender or color or some other cultural identifier, right? What happens when the personal becomes political? I've been watching some of the lectures about identity politics, which is political positions that are based on certain social groups that people identify with, right? You've heard the term out there. It's a loaded term, identity politics. But if we can get past the baggage surrounding the term, Dr. Lawrence Cahoon includes a couple of lectures about various identities and groups throughout our history and how many of these groups were treated, how a society approached and should approach the cultural subsets within itself. It's a thick little course, but it's really good. It's really worth checking out at The Great Courses Plus, the sponsor of today's show. And as part of his lecture series addresses women and women's rights activism, it's a great tie-in for the show topic today. The Great Courses Plus offers over 8,500 different lectures on a huge host of subjects, from philosophy to science to math to hobbies to auto repair to whatever. You can stream or download to your computer, your TV, your laptop, or smartphone. You can stream it like an audio podcast during your commute with the Great Courses Plus app. And I know you are going to love it. Enhance your knowledge today. Right now, they're giving my listeners a full month of full unlimited access to all their lectures, the entire library for free for a month. But you have to use my special URL. So start your free month right now. Sign up at thegreatcoursesplus.com/Seth. That's thegreatcoursesplus.com/Seth. I would like to welcome to the podcast Dr. Karen Garst. At one point, she was executive director of the Oregon Community College Association and the Oregon State Bar. Dr. Garst writes for faithlessfeminist.com, and she's author of a book called Women Beyond Belief, Discovering Life Without Religion. Karen Garst, glad you're here. It's great to have you.
It's my pleasure.
Author of the book Women Beyond Belief. You got to tell me the story in a nutshell, and for the listeners, how did Women Beyond Belief happen?
Well, a couple of years ago, as you remember, the U.S. Supreme Court issued its decision in Hobby Lobby, where they said that based on some previous decisions, this company had religious views that it really didn't want to provide certain forms of birth control to its female employees. And in a 5-4 decision, the court agreed with them, and I lost it.
You lost. You just said, enough of this. This is madness. I'm getting myself back in the game.
Absolutely. I mean, I went through the 60s and 70s where we fought for this. What are we fighting for it again? And obviously, religion plays a huge role in subjugation of women, not only in the United States and the rationale that politicians use. So I decided to write a book about women who've left religion to give women models that they could do the same.
You run the website faithlessfeminist.com, correct?
Yes. I hired a marketing person, and he said, you can't write a book without a blog. So at least I knew what a blog was.
Karen, I'm already hearing the slamming of a few virtual doors. Some people stomp out of the room after I say the word feminist. I'm sure you're probably familiar with this.
Well, I had no idea how that word had morphed when I decided to use it. My marketing person suggested godless grandmother, and I said, could we not emphasize my age, please? And I had always identified myself as a feminist. But there's been a lot of pushback. And when we get around to talking about the Mythicist Milwaukee conference, there was a huge amount of pushback there. But to me, feminism is simply gender equality. And I believe that religion is the last cultural barrier to gender equality.
I want to get back into that when we bring the panel in here in just a few minutes. The book itself is what?
Well, what it is basically is 22 women from all different backgrounds from 18 to 70 years old who just tell their story of why they left religion. Now, some of those women grew up in Europe, so they had a lot less to shed. But some of them were raised in a fundamentalist religion, and they talk about the damage that was done to them because of that. So these are personal stories.
Hemant Mehta was speaking at PastaCon, which was a great event in Pennsylvania recently. And he was saying from the stage, and I just heard about this, and I've heard the speech before, where he was talking about our need to tell our stories, deconversion stories, our extrication from religion, and just our sort of personal biographies. We have a lot of data. We've got plenty of science out there, but people are aching to connect on a human level.
Exactly. And I think we all, no matter what age we're at, we like to see models who look like us and say, oh, they can do that, so can I. And as you well know, most of the people, or the majority of people who are active in the atheist movement, are men. Out of 100 books on Amazon on atheism, about 90% plus are written by men. And they're great books, and I think they help a lot of people. But I do think there needs to be voices of women so that other women can say, yeah, that was kind of unique what she did, and I think I can do it too. It's kind of like the little boy who looks up at President Obama and says, he has my skin color. I guess I can do that too. I'll be president.
What do you think, from your perspective, what do you think explains the fact that it's been so lopsided? It's so white male heavy, or has been in the past. And I addressed this just last week, but I'd be curious to your perspective.
Well, I think when you look at new atheism and the Four Horsemen, Dawkins, et cetera, they came from fields like science, philosophy, et cetera, that were at that time, I think, and still there may be more men involved in them. And I think you have those people who are really vocal. They're going to attract other people like them to that. I also think it's because there's more women in churches. And, we could go into that, but men have been less attracted to attending church than women have. They are not as much part of the community as women are. So I do think it's natural that there's probably more men who left first.
It's interesting. When I was in I was a Christian broadcaster for 12 years, but our radio station targeted women 18 to 34 because especially those who were young moms, when they were in the car or whatever, they almost always control the radio. So if you get mom, then you get dad and the kids by default, usually, if they're all together. But the other thing was whenever this particular demographic did start a family and they had children, women 18 to 34 having children, they, even more than their husbands, according to the data that we had, they felt that, oh, I'm a parent now. I've got a young child now. I need to be a good parent now. I need to get us back in church now. And they would, even if they weren't a church goer, even if they weren't raised in religion, they would feel this sort of cultural need. Oh, a good person, a good parent goes to church, takes their kids to church. And so then they would sort of re-enter that field. And we would target women 18 to 34 for that reason. Does that resonate at all with you?
Oh, absolutely. And Sikivu Hutchinson, who wrote Moral Combat, talks about in the African American community, if the parents don't feel like you just described, the grandparents will take the kids to church. So there's this definite feeling like, yes, that's what you have to do with children. You have to take them to church. So you better get back into it. I also think women are more connected to church because they're the ones who do stuff. I have a 96-year-old mother-in-law who is still doing potlucks for funerals at her local Catholic parish.
It connects her to her community. It gives her a sense of purpose. It engages her with, her friends and family. And, I can totally understand that. Do you have a background in the church?
I was raised in Bismarck, North Dakota. You want to take a guess?
Let's see. Is it Catholic or Lutheran?
Lutheran.
All right.
I was raised in the Lutheran church, and in the 50s and 60s, everybody went to church in our town. I don't know what it was like, what it is like now, but I knew what church all my friends went to, and we had so many activities associated with church. We had Luther League, we had choir, we had a confirmation, all of those different things. That was your social group. I often say I wouldn't have had a social life without the church.
Well, it's often designed that way, isn't it? Right? They become your activities. They become the music you listen to. They become the people who visit you in the hospital. There's a strategic thing involved, not just a community, but churches often create outreach groups to meet these needs on purpose.
I think that's very true. And one of my authors said that when she and her husband left the church, this was in Colorado Springs, Colorado, none of the people would have anything to do with her. Oh. And so I think there's probably a lot of atheists sitting in the pews going, I'm not giving up my friends.
My dad's from Minnesota, and he used to talk about how the Catholics and the Lutherans were always just throwing stones at each other. They're throwing the stones over the fence at each other. We Lutherans are enlightened. Those Catholics are going straight to hell, or vice versa. Did you experience any of that? I'm just curious.
Oh, yes. My sister had a big debate with a pastor once about Catholics. And the funny thing is, I'll tell you a little story. I was coming home from first grade, and this guy walked me home. And of course, I knew he was Catholic. And I went to my dad. And can you imagine? I'm like 7, and I even thought of this. And I asked him if it was okay if a Lutheran married a Catholic. And his answer was, well, it's better to have commonalities and so many differences. And my sister and I both end up marrying lapsed Catholics. So I thought it was pretty funny.
Well, you hear the stories. I'm not going to the wedding if you marry a Catholic. I'm not even going to participate if you marry a Catholic. It's this weird form of shunning.
Well, and it's kind of funny. I went to a private Lutheran school, which was very liberal. The first religion course talked about the different oral strains of the Old Testament. But one of the classes I had was by a Catholic monk, Father Emmerich Lawrence, Order of St. Benedict. And he says, don't get the order of those letters confused during the semester. So things changed.
The book itself, Women Beyond Belief. How do we open more doors and opportunities to create better diversity, gender diversity and beyond, from your perspective?
Well, I think people need to be aware that if they're going to have a panel and they have 5 men on it. They might want to include a woman to get a diversity of viewpoint because we have different experiences. So I think that conventions and conferences should look at that. Plus, I think we need more women to speak out. Now, Wendy's going to be coming on, and she asked me whether she could use Women Beyond Belief for her podcast. And I said, absolutely. So we're working together, we're sharing things, and we just need to keep building up women's voices so more women are speaking out.
That's pretty cool of you, right? I mean, you wrote the book, you sort of own the title in that way, and you're like, use the title. Whatever helps the larger, the big picture. It doesn't always happen that way. People can be very proprietary there.
I think that's very true. And I had made this list of atheist podcasts, and it's on a spreadsheet. And I tell everyone, when you want it, let me know. I'll send it to you.
That's
cool. If we really want to make a difference, then we need to share and cooperate and work together.
You've been witness firsthand to some of the pettiness out there. I want to ask the panel about this, but I'm weary, Karen. I just get weary sometimes at the pebbles that we trip over out there with this big picture, this religious steamroller, this well-funded multi-billion-dollar magic machine that's going after the young and the vulnerable and all the work we have to do. And I see just squabbling and drama and, does it ever just exasperate you?
It does. And the conference and the aftermath of the conference was real discouraging. I think that we've got a big power to counteract, and that's religion. And it's in our politics. It's in the decisions and the bills that Congress is passing today. A lot of it has to do with restriction of reproductive rights for women. And if we just are going to squabble among ourselves, something is going to happen that we're all going to regret. So I think we need to work together, keep our eye on the bigger picture, and really talk about what a myth religion is and how it's been used for millennia for power and control, particularly over women.
You brought up MythCon a couple of times. All right, let's talk. I was originally on the docket as a special guest, and then all this stuff blew up and I was a speaker. And finally, I just decided the white noise of it was just, this is not why I do conferences. I wasn't impressed with how the conference was being run or put together. I was just having all kinds of problems with it. And I just opted out. And, for me, it was, I began to see everybody squaring off, and I began to see all of the controversies. Sargon of Akkad, this hugely controversial speaker, he's on stage with Thomas Smith. You were in the audience for MythCon, is that right?
Oh, I was.
Tell me about it. From your perspective, what happened?
Well, I had, been very supportive of Mythicist Milwaukee. I've been on their podcast. I've done a show for them, and I helped to publicize it and had plans to go there. And there were some very good elements. Melissa Chen was very good. Ron Miscavige, Faisal and Azra did a good job. But, we had this debate. Now, I wasn't around then, but there was this discussion about atheism should include intersectionality, it should include feminism, it should be, atheism plus. And the decision was made and it kind of, petered away. No, we're going to focus on skepticism and atheism. But this whole conference, Sargon, it was an antithesis of that. Here you have 2 men talking about feminism and intersectionality, and you're going, I thought this was an atheism conference. But the most discouraging thing, Seth, was sitting in the audience and seeing the crowds, mostly white men, clap at everything Sargon said. And Sargon said, feminism is a mental illness. Everyone who says they're a feminist has a mental disease, and, on and on. So that was very depressing to me.
I saw the clip from his video where he had linked feminism to autism, so I know the kind of thing that you're speaking about. Mythicist Milwaukee still seems alarmingly proud of this particular speaker setup and under the umbrella of what they called discourse. And I'm in this weird spot because I'm one of those guys, I'm a free speech guy. You're like, I'll stand on stage with anybody I choose to stand on stage with. I support the right of an organizer to invite whoever they want. But at the same time, I can also lament the choices made and begin to assess and say, what possibly is going to come out of this besides just, the smoke from the dumpster fire kind of thing. Did it look to you like the audience was sort of front-loaded with Sargon people? I mean, did they show up for their guy and then disappear after his speech, or what?
Yes, they did. A lot of them left after Sargon was done. But the thing that was fascinating to me was his relating feminism and intersectionality to somehow this Marxist collectivism, which made absolutely no sense whatsoever. So it wasn't as if there was even a logical discussion or a logical debate. Now, if they had had two people with different points of view and they had a moderator and, they provided some intellectual discussion about the issues, but it really was just a shouting match.
Let me go ahead and bring in my other two special guests for this conversation. Joining me for this sort of panel discussion, I've got Abby Hafer. Abby is a biology professor and author of The Not So Intelligent Designer. And then Wendy Marsman is host of the Women Beyond Belief podcast. Thank you all for being here. It's great to have you.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Good to be here.
Wendy, I'm going to start with you. I've been talking a little bit with Karen, but the need for more female voices, the need for better, more equal representation out there in the various shades of this movement. Do you want to speak to that at all?
Well, I had a background in fundamental Christianity. And so for 40 years, I saw that side of the relationship between men and women, and men being higher up on the scale and women having to always be in submission to the men. And so from that background that I have, I was very used to being quieted, being shut down, not feeling like I had a voice. So coming out of that and coming into atheism, I see there's a lot of other women like that who had a similar background to me. And so as I have felt more confident telling my story and just finding my own voice, then I saw the need for that. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to start the podcast.
Can I camp out there for a second, Wendy? I'm curious. If you go into more progressive or seeker-friendly churches like Osteen's Church in Houston and elsewhere, you don't see as much of the man is the head of the household and the woman submits. Although it's there, it's not as overt. But like when I was growing up in the Baptist church, it was a big thing. Women should be silent in church and women should submit. What was the flavor of the religion that you were brought up in or existed in before you rejected it all?
Yeah, it was evangelical Christianity with the fundamentalist side added to it. So we took the Bible very literally. Of course, we don't take absolutely everything literally, so you still are cherry picking, but men are the head of the home. The children submit to the parents. The pastors always had to be men. And the women couldn't teach adult Sunday school class if there were any men in it. And yeah, pretty much the men are the leaders. And that's what we were just used to. And you submit and you don't say, when you get married, you're committed for the rest of your life. If you get divorced, that's a sin. If you get divorced, then you can't remarry because that's called adultery. And all the other rules, such as, women need to be modest and not be either disrespectful to men or not be a stumbling block to men by what they wear and how they act.
So it's your fault. It's like Eve in the garden all over again. If the man screws up, it's because you enabled the screw up. It's somehow the woman's fault, no matter how you slice it.
Yes, I'm sure you've been seeing what's happened on social media the last couple of days with how many women are starting to come forward with the hashtag #MeToo, representing how many women have been shut up or not been believed when they have come forward and talked about the abuse that they've received. And that was just the water we drank. We just believed that we didn't have a voice.
And if you speak against the sort of patriarchal figure in this religious model, it's like you're criticizing God.
Yes. And when you're told that at a young age, you just don't speak up. You just keep it inside. And you always had to obey your elders and obey the pastor and you obey your husband. And you get used to bottling it all up inside and holding it inside and becoming free of that. Then you have to find out who you are and find out, who that person would have become if they had a voice when they were young.
Friend of mine, Vicki Garrison, talks about escaping Quiverful, and there were shades of that, where she was just essentially the women cooked and they were baby factories and they submitted and beyond that, they were sort of non-persons in so many ways.
Yeah, for sure. My father-in-law, they had 5 children. My first husband was the youngest of 5, and he used to always say, a quiverful was 5 arrows, apparently. That's what he believed. So he felt privileged to be able to say that he had a quiverful, and 3 of his own children had 5 kids. I felt bad that we didn't have more kids. He was always pushing us to have more than 3. So, and in our church, 4 was the average. We had one couple who had 10 children, and they were really looked up to. So,
10?
Yep.
Children. I would look at them and be like, we know what causes this, right?
Well, that was as of last year. They might be having more. I don't know.
Oh. Abby Hafer, forgive me, Abby, but of my panel, you are the one that I am the least familiar with. Introduce yourself.
Okay, I'm Abby Hafer, and I'm one of those rare people. I was actually born and raised an atheist. It goes back to at least my grandfather on one side of the family. So I haven't had those same having to shuck off religion experiences that other people have had. But on the other hand, it means that my entire life has been spent trying to learn about people's religions so I could figure out where they were coming from.
You think we're all nuts, don't you? How thick can you be? That's what you're thinking. Right, Abby?
Well, there's also a lot in literature. It's hard to read James Joyce if you don't know much about Christianity or Catholicism. There are just all kinds of assumptions that are made in our society that I had to learn about because I never learned that stuff to begin with. And the problem is, honestly, that also our society is patriarchal, whether you're a Christian or a monotheist or not. And so, I still wound up, by the way, I should say also, my father was in the military. You want to talk about obedience? Oh, yeah, we learned about that.
And you want to talk about a patriarchal system.
Right. So, I know a bit about chains of command and who bosses around whom. And and the military is very patriarchal. And, and my family came from a family that believed in primogeniture and things like this. So the youngest child and female and the only girl in the family was definitely bottom of the totem pole. And I had to shuck a lot of that. It was kind of the same thing. It's like, actually, this isn't anything that I did. The other thing that was interesting was that, on the other hand, what I didn't have to shuck was not thinking that science was real. So, lots of people in my family studied science. My father was an engineer. My mom studied chemistry in college and the like. So the whole science end of things came very, I won't say naturally to me, but there was never any particular problem or question in my mind with finding out about science.
Abby Hafer, do you find, from your perspective, there's a deficit of women in the sciences?
Well, the sad part is that the inequality actually grows over time. So there are plenty of women who go to college and study science, and they work really hard at it and do really well. But unfortunately, throughout the career trajectory, women drop off at far higher rates than men do. And so the income gap between male and female scientists actually grows over time. So it's not the kind of thing where you can say, okay, I've had some disadvantages, but now I have my PhD and, now I'll get a good job and I'll have a good career and this kind of thing. Women actually lose out at every stage in career advancement in the sciences. And this is a serious problem.
Okay, I've got Karen Garst, I've got Abby Hafer, and I've got Wendy Marsman as my panel here. The pay gap. This is debated, strongly debated. It exists. No, it doesn't exist. It's real. No, it's not real. It's fact. No, it's fiction. Do any of you three want to address the pay gap?
I could give you a specific example if you'd like.
Karen Garst, give me your perspective.
I was executive director of the Oregon State Bar, and they were hiring somebody for a subsidiary organization we had for malpractice, and I knew what they were going to do, and I told them where this person should be because I had 90 employees, they had 40 employees, and they hired him making $35,000 more than I was making. Um, so I went to my board and I said, that's unacceptable. They hired an HR consultant and she said, the only thing I can come up with is sex discrimination. And I got a $35,000 raise. Now, that's an unusual situation. I do think we have to stand up for ourselves. But you look at the recent news about Hollywood and the leading woman isn't being paid as much as the leading man. I think it's improved a lot because women are getting into more fields. When I was with the bar, 50 years ago, there weren't a lot of women lawyers, and now they're half of law schools, and they make up a large share of the percentage of the profession. But I think science, as Abby said, is still not quite there yet. But there are instances all over of women who apply for a job and they may not negotiate that first salary, and then they're disadvantaged throughout. I think it's, as I said, it's gotten a lot better, but there are still instances of inequality in the workplace.
Abby or Wendy, you want to chime in with anything?
Well, this is Abby, and I was going to say part of it is also that salary information is so very secret that this can actually cause a problem with, knowing what you're worth. But the other thing that we see in terms of pay gap, or that leads to the pay gap, is, as I said, basically sort of a promotion gap and career advancement gap between men and women in the sciences, where at every stage of the career, there are just fewer women who make that next step up. And if you don't make the next step up, you're not going to get the pay. And so there's a lot of disadvantage and problem there, at least in the sciences.
Wendy, anything to add?
Well, I'm coming from a different perspective, from a religion where men were encouraged to get an education and women weren't. So my parents never encouraged me to get any post-secondary education other than vocational skills. So I went to cooking school and Bible college, whereas my brother was encouraged to go to university and he ended up getting a master's, and I ended up going on the mission field. And so at the age of 40, I had basically no training other than, raising a family and being a seamstress. So I was working at a factory for minimum wage at the age of 40 and realized that I needed to go and get some academic training. So I went to business college for a year, but that's as far as I got. So, to me, I'm coming from a different perspective. I have no idea what I'm worth because I don't know how far I could have gone if I had actually gone to university.
You feel resentful?
Yeah, I do, because the ACE school, Accelerated Christian Education school that I went to for 7 years, and then I was homeschooled and then a Christian school after that, it really, really hijacked my education in so many ways. And I have a really hard time reading. I'm a very slow reader because of that. The ACE school is structured in a way where you set your own goals. It teaches you to become a workaholic. And it doesn't teach you very good group skills because you're not allowed to talk in class. There's no interaction. So, I don't know where I could have gone. So I'm angry at that, that my parents put me through that and didn't see that it was harmful. But I'm trying to make the best of it at this age. I did get straight A's when I did go to business school at the age of 40, but I hated it. I just, I'd way rather learn on the job or something. So right now I'm a virtual assistant and have a contract for somebody. So I'm able to do computer work from what I learned in that 1 year, but I'm never going to go much past this unless I actually
Wendy
go back
Marsman,
to college.
I think you and I may have studied some of the same stuff. I did. We had did you do the PACEs? Did you have the PACE booklets?
Yes.
And there are a few things on this planet, I'm sure Abby can chime in, there are a few things on this planet as terrifying as an ACE science book.
Mm-hmm.
Those who aren't familiar with the PACE program and the ACE program would probably think it parody, right? They wouldn't think it was real, but we know it is.
Yeah.
Well, this is Karen. I think I fall in between you because I grew up in a very religious home. My father was very religious, but my mother was well educated and she encouraged us. And my father was very supportive of science and, helped me in class and explain things. So, I call it a very liberal Lutheranism, but there wasn't that dichotomy between religion and science that there were for at least two of you.
So you weren't locked out of the equation the way Wendy was.
Oh, absolutely not. My mother encouraged me to go to school. Now, back in the day, there were kind of three things that women did. They were nurses, they were secretaries, or they were teachers. So my first career, I became a teacher. My sister was a teacher. My mother was a teacher. And part of that is, you just don't see a model. I did this report in ninth grade on early hominids, and it was absolutely fascinating to me, but it never occurred to me to explore anthropology. I never saw a woman science teacher or anything. So it's that, kind of that issue of models. But I know my parents would fully supported me if I had decided to do that. So in the religion I was brought in, it was pro-science. They never said anything against evolution or anything like that. And this was in the 50s and 60s.
Abby Hafer, what type of class do you teach?
I teach human anatomy and physiology in a small liberal arts college. This is human anatomy and physiology, mostly for nursing students. I'm going to jump in, however, on what Wendy was talking about. I'm not familiar with the PACE program. It would be very interesting to see their books. But I am going to jump on this and point out that this is also an equality issue and a human rights issue, because right now you probably know that in two states in the Union, Louisiana and Tennessee, it is legal to teach, quote unquote, alternatives to evolution in science classes in public schools in the United States. And this is unconstitutional, but they're doing it anyway. And there are many other places where I think there's a lot of winking and nodding going on. And much as this is infuriating to scientists, it should be infuriating to everybody else as an education issue and as a social equality issue. Because if you have children who are not taught about evolution, or even worse, who are taught creationism or intelligent design, if they want to go on in the sciences, or let's say they want to become a nurse or a doctor or a scientist or whatever, when they go to college, they're going to be at a huge disadvantage, because while everybody else is busy steaming ahead, learning their science, which is a struggle even for well-prepared students at college, they are going to have to unlearn all the junk they learned before and make up all the stuff that they should have been learning in school and high school, and keep up with their college courses all at once. And this is going to mean that most of them won't make it. So the kids in poor districts in Louisiana and Tennessee are basically being shut out of a lot of good careers because of the religiosity of their state legislators. This is a matter of social equality. It's not just something that scientists get steamed about, much as we deserve to get steamed about it, because it's a terrible thing and it is not helpful when people don't know science and don't understand science. But it is also a disadvantage to anybody who is educated in a system like that.
Do you consider, any of you, consider the inhibition of education for these young kids, the teaching of anti-science? Do you consider it child abuse?
Well, I think that word hijack I heard that this week, and that's sort of how I feel, that my education was hijacked. I didn't have a choice what school I went to for those first 15 years. And it wasn't until I was 15 years old before I actually sat in a regular classroom with a teacher in front and, 30 students. And it was quite a culture shock. So I don't know. I don't know if it's child abuse. To me, I had child abuse from other vantage points, such as watching A Thief in the Night movie and being scared of hell and being scared of being left behind. I don't know if, you could say the school itself is child abuse. It's just incredibly poor education.
Well, this is Karen. There's another dimension to this. I spoke last week with a reporter from the Huffington Post who was doing a study on private education and looking at, whether it's vouchers or some other way where tax dollars are going to support those. And in particular, she was looking at ACE and some of these other things you've mentioned. And I'm really looking forward to seeing her story come out, because now that we have DeVos as the head of education, if we get more vouchers, we're actually going to be using public funds to support that very narrow and wrong type of education.
I mentioned last week that we have a diversity problem, or we are working to overcome a discrepancy, an imbalance in atheist activism. Does the quote-unquote atheist movement have a sexism problem? What about some of the charges out there that atheist conferences are actually dangerous places for women? After a short break, we're going to get into this and more as I continue with my panel of special guests on the broadcast Women Beyond Belief. Back in just a second. Look, I know it's not even Thanksgiving, but if you do the holiday gift-giving thing and you're shopping for a guy and you plan ahead, so you're doing this stuff early, I have just solved Christmas for you, okay? If a man in your life has a birthday coming up, or maybe another special occasion, an anniversary gift, or whatever, I have solved that for you. A couple of years ago, I switched to Harry's for a great shave at a fair price because I like their style. I like their products. I've given Harry shave sets as gifts to my friends and family members. They're just classy. They actually get used. Harry's offers their blades at like half the price of the leading 5-blade razor by working directly with us. So you save the middleman and retail cost and all that. They are providing a premium shave experience and a 100% quality guarantee. And check this out. Today, claim your free trial offer from Harry's. It's a $13 value for free when you sign up. Just cover the shipping. The free trial set includes a weighted, ergonomic razor handle, 5 precision-engineered blades with lubricating strip and trimmer blade. You get a rich lathering shave gel and a travel blade cover. All that for free. You cover shipping. Try it for yourself. I think you will be so impressed, you will choose Harry's for yourself, and you will gift Harry's to the guys on your shopping list. Just check it off, right? Because it's a great present they will actually use and love. So get your free trial set. Go to Harry's, Harrys. That's harrys.com/thethinkingatheist right now. harrys.com/thethinkingatheist. I'm so thankful for the sponsors on this broadcast. I'm also hugely thankful for my supporters on Patreon. They get a totally commercial-free version of the radio show and a bonus broadcast just for them every single month. If you'd like to support me and this show, you can go to patreon.com/Seth Andrews, and your support is greatly appreciated. It helps me to do what I do. Continuing the discussion now with my panel of very special guests, Karen Garst, who is the admin of faithlessfeminist.com and the author of Women Beyond Belief, Discovering Life Without Religion. I've got Abby Hafer. She's a professor and author of the book, The Not-So-Intelligent Designer, Why Evolution Explains the Human Body and Intelligent Design Does Not. And Wendy Marsman, a former fundamentalist Christian who escaped religion and is now host of the Women Beyond Belief podcast. And our discussion continues. Can we talk about the atheist movements in regard to gender equality? Do we have an equality problem? Do we have a sexism problem? Do we have an abuse problem in the movement?
Don't get me started.
Well, talk to me. I mean, tell me what you think. I want to know.
Well, I want to say that when I got involved with this, when I wrote my book, Women Beyond Belief, and you can see Wendy and I are cooperating because her podcast is named Women Beyond Belief, I felt really welcomed into the community. Very early on, somebody introduced me to Dr. Peter Boghossian, who happens to be in Portland, where I am in Oregon, and really introduced me to a lot of people. I also attended a Women in Secularism conference, which I thought was fascinating. But I have noticed online, and I think Wendy can speak to this, some of the feedback you get when you post something is really annoying. But I think that's true in a number of areas. But Seth and I were talking earlier about the Mythicist Milwaukee conference, and I think that was the most distressing thing that I have encountered in the last 2 years.
Well, let me camp out there for a second, Karen, and I don't mean to interrupt, but I want to hit a point before we go any further. From my perspective, MythCon is an anomaly. I'm not saying that people haven't acted in untoward or inappropriate ways. Wherever you find human beings, you're going to find the best and worst. But as I go out and participate in the conference circuit, whether we're at Imagine No Religion or whether we're doing the Florida Free Thought event or the American Atheist National Convention or whatever, and I do probably 35 speaking dates a year. The vast, vast, vast majority of these we see come off really without a hitch. I mean, people are coming, men and women and young people all having a wonderful time in a safe environment where it's positive, we're building community, we're learning new things, and we're trying to promote better ideas. And so from my perspective, MythCon is not how I define the conference of the 21st century in the atheist movement. And I feel like some might be trying to do that, and I find that disturbing. You can speak to that, or anyone can speak to that if you'd like.
I wouldn't disagree with you at all. It was really my first encounter, as I said, as I went to the Reason Rally and the Reason Rally Convention, et cetera, over the last 2 years. I really hadn't encountered anyone who wasn't welcoming. So I think it is an anomaly. I think you're right.
I'm not saying there aren't assholes out there. I mean, it's, especially on the internet, right? People troll for sport. But does the lowest common denominator define us,
Two things. I do think that where trolls are concerned, there is a certain thrill in being able, it's sort of recreational brutality. People can say all kinds of stuff and suffer no repercussions if they're online because you can't reach out over cyberspace and strangle somebody. And so, they kind of, I think, get a kind of, weird sort of perverted thrill out of it. And I think that that's what a lot of it is. In my own circumstances, I've actually had a really good time, particularly since I'm a scientist, and there are not that many biological scientists who are actually in the movement, actively working in it. So I get welcomed a lot, and I've generally had a terrific time. So I can't say from personal experience that I've had any problems. And, I have done quite a few speaking gigs as well, and book signings and all kinds of stuff like that. And it's been fine.
And it needs to be said, before I get back to Wendy, that if somebody's acting in an inappropriate way, and the conferences that we attend have a code of conduct in place and instructions for those who do feel like they've been placed in a bad position or they've been accosted by someone, here's your resources, come get us, we want to fix this, we want to make sure you're safe. There is an unfortunate shade to every movement. There are people who have and hold the brand of atheist who are sexist pigs. So I don't want to say that we haven't seen the a-hole factor out there, because unfortunately every culture has them. I don't know, Wendy, did you want to flesh this out anymore? You got anything?
Yeah, coming from a religion where, men were in charge and men were pastors, if a pastor screwed up, had an affair, he'd get kicked out of that church, but many times he'd be able to go to another church. And we've seen this, of course, with the Catholic Church, where abuse is pushed under the rug and, the priests can go to another diocese. So when I came out of that, I think I had rose-colored glasses. I just replaced them with, orange-colored glasses, something. And so I was seeing the atheist movement, from the perspective of somebody who felt free and who was having a voice. And so I guess I sort of thought everybody else was like me in the atheist movement, that would, that they were shedding this legalism, shedding off their old guilt and shame and just, being really free. And so for the first 6 months, after I joined the Clergy Project last fall and met some men, and they seemed really nice and welcoming, and it seemed like everything was great. And, and I went to a conference in June, and then in August, something came up, and I was trying to advocate for some women who had a sexual predator who was harassing them. And I just hit a brick wall, and it really popped the bubble. And, I took those glasses off, and I saw that atheism wasn't much different than the religion I came from. And there was, patriarchy, and there was sexist men in the atheist movement just as much as I had seen in religion. And so I guess I started to see that humans are humans, and we have to find our own groups that we're going to associate with. I actually am putting a podcast out shortly where myself and another podcast lady talk about the possible need. Well, this is my idea that I think we need denominations in the atheist movement, just like there's denominations in Christianity, because that's how we keep our society civil when people disagree, is how I'm seeing it. So I'm starting to realize that I can choose, being more choosy instead of feeling like I have to be stuck and then feeling like I'm shut up again when the men come on and are very outspoken and try to shut women up and continue their bullying, instead of feeling that I just have to crawl back in my shell and be quiet again like I was in the church. I'm realizing, no, I don't want to do that anymore. I want to create new things. I want to be a voice. And so I have, great vision for, creating a women's atheist conference and a women's atheist foundation and all kinds of things. So to me, I want to increase the view that women are important and that women have a voice by creating new things instead of being shut up. Because there was a time where I was just about ready to quit the podcast because it was just so frustrating. So that's sort of how I've moved forward, and I call it my evolution in new atheism.
Well, we can talk about that. I want to spend just a second here. And Wendy's referring to a specific instance where there was someone, and was it a partner who had said they had acted in an untoward way, they'd been cheating or whatnot. And you were sort of pounding the drum that this person is a liar in this relationship and that the world needs to know. Am I accurately representing that?
Well, this person, I wouldn't have spoken up if this person hadn't influenced our lives, but this person has a blog and he has quite a large group of following. And my husband had been very influenced by his blog as my husband was leaving Christianity and becoming an atheist. And my husband only supported 2 people on Patreon, and this was one of them. So when we found out about what this person is like, it shocked us that we had been blindsided. And it was stressful because it felt like, we had believed this person. And that's the thing. When we came into the atheist movement, and I think my husband's felt that way too, that we don't know, as people who are new to atheism, we don't know who to trust. So we just start trusting everybody and basing, if they sound like they are reliable or that they are trustworthy or have integrity, we just believe them at face value. I think that's one thing that the church doesn't give us a lot of skills in. When you're told to just obey the scripture, obey your pastor, you don't learn a lot of discernment skills. So I find that I trust first, and then I a lot of times get hurt instead of being more discerning and maybe being more skeptical. So it's also something I'm going to have to grow out of and learn.
Well, where I'm going with this, Wendy, is if you then contact activists wherever and you say, hey, so-and-so is doing such and such, and you need to go and expose them, do you feel that if those activists then don't go out and pound that particular drum, it's not that you aren't believed, but these people have only one report about a specific relationship. We may be tremendously concerned. We may want to know more. But if we don't go out and use our platforms to call this person a predator or whatever, do you feel like that we are then not advocates for women? Do you feel that we're betraying perhaps some trust?
Well, I guess for me, I realized where my bar or my standard of activism was. And when I realized that I had not necessarily a higher standard, a different standard of activism than people that I wanted to speak up, then instead of getting mad at those people, I realized that it's not their fault at all, because we all have this, we all have a fire in us, and we all have a fight and flight mechanism. And I'm more of a fighter. So
let's say we don't know you as well as you know yourself. Let's say we don't know the circumstances as well as you do, and we want to. Like, whatever the truth is, we want to know that. Whatever injustice or wrong is being done, we want that to be stopped. We want to promote the good, and we want to sort of quell the bad. We want to get rid of the bad element. We want the same stuff you want, but we don't have your perspective. We haven't been able to vet it the way that you have. We are interested, but we are in many ways a little bit hamstrung because the consequences are so great. I mean, if we go public, then all bets are off. We want to know, right? We need to know. It's a difficult thing. We want to make sure that we're believing those, or at least properly listening to those who are saying that bad behavior has taken place. but we also don't want to be reckless when we are supposed to be about the facts and the evidence and what the truth is. How do responsible people navigate these difficult situations? I don't know if Wendy, Abby, or Karen can jump in on this very sticky subject.
This is Karen, and I do think we have to be careful about rumors and people who are accused of things, and be sure that we vetted that we know for a fact. I know there's been other people, don't know particular who Wendy is talking about, but I've heard rumors about people and what they've done. And I'm a little cautious to find out exactly, have they been charged with something? Have they been found guilty, et cetera? Because we also, we want to be skeptical about it. We want some evidence.
But if the person who has been accosted or even assaulted, if the statistics say they rarely will come forward in any official way, what do we do with that?
Problem. Look at Wiseman. How many women did he sexually harass before one came forward? And you look at people like Jane Fonda, who had all the wherewithal to say something, and she remained silent. So it's. I think you're right. It's a balancing act. And if you know something specific and you have evidence for it, then yes, you should come forward to prevent it from happening to anybody else.
Harvey Weinstein of the Weinstein brothers, he finally, after decades of being a sexual predator, is now being called out. And then he admits himself to rehab for sex addiction, which I don't even think sex addiction is recognized by the DSM-5. It sounds like he's attempting to be the victim when he himself was the predator.
I think it's more that he is attempting to sort of go through the motions of almost like repentance. He's saying, look, I'm repenting. In a little while, I'll emerge with a nice, clean soul, and it'll be like none of that ever happened, right?
Be like Jimmy Swaggart, right? After he had the prostitutes and he did the mea culpa in front of the audience and he cried the tears and he hit the reset button and was back on the circuit.
Right. I don't think Weinstein's coming back. I think there are enough people who are going to speak up. I think he's done.
Do you think there are people? I'm not asking you to place yourself in a position where you're compromising yourself in any way, or if you're uncomfortable with the discussion, we can move on. But there have been charges that there are people who attend or even present at free thought events or conferences, even science conferences. They're on the prowl kind of thing, and they are conducting themselves in unfortunate ways.
Can I go back to the other topic a little bit? So both of you mentioned being cautious when coming forward. So I did not come into the situation lightly and just, try to smear somebody. I was very much in connection with the two women involved and messaging them and asking them constantly, how far do you want me to go? How much can I show? And most of it was just trying to bring to light what they had already shared publicly. So I didn't create a scandal in that way. I was just trying to give them a bigger voice because, they don't have a following and a platform and a podcast. And both of them at this point in time are, trying to get back on their feet after, really being affected by this situation. And, I'm trying to take my cues from them and how far I, can help them. But what I did do, a few days ago, I had joined an on Facebook group, a fairly large Facebook group on Facebook that's for women who've left religion. And I posed the question, I said, is there anybody who knows of a woman who has actually lied about being sexually assaulted or harassed? And because what would the woman have to gain? And there was a few people that came on and, shared some odd kinds of situations. And then the thread took on its own, somebody else sort of redirected it and started saying, well, how many people have been abused and either were afraid to tell anybody or weren't believed? And it just exploded. And the next day, the admin people for that page closed that line and started a new one and basically asked that. And there was over 100 women who spoke up, and some of them had horrible stories of rape and incest and molestation, and the cops didn't believe them, the parents didn't believe them, and it was just heartbreaking. And I think too much of our culture, for people who have not been abused, they seem to want more proof, and for people who have been abused, usually believe the victims first. So it's almost like there's two camps out there.
Well, and Wendy, I think you did your due diligence. I mean, you did find evidence. You did talk to people who were involved, and these were people you know and people you believe. That's what I count. You know, sometimes there's rumors going around, but you specifically spoke to people and you felt compelled to go forth because you have a platform. I see nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
This is Abby speaking. I was just going to add in, you were talking specifically about sort of atheist-specific sexual jerkiness. And I would say the problem sometimes is that, you know, if men leave religion, there will be those who will say, oh boy, now there are no rules. And they interpret freedom as meaning freedom to be a jerk. And so, you know, there will be that small subset of guys who are attracted to atheism because they think that there they will be free to be a jerk. And, you know, that's just an unfortunate thing. And as you said, you know, there will be jerks everywhere. But I think, unfortunately, that is kind of an attraction. And since in the past few decades, men were the majority of the sort of atheist activists, I think there was also maybe a little bit of an attraction again for guys who did not like women of, oh boy, this is my boys club where there aren't girls around. And that's very attractive to a certain kind of guy. And so then they get really annoyed when the girls want to come into their clubhouse. And so I think that this is where you see, as you said, that subset of male atheists who, you know, just who don't want the women around, basically.
I mean, I'm a guy. I've seen how men often talk to and about women. You know, I've seen them catcalling and treating them like a piece of meat. And I've seen, you know, hey there, little lady, come here and let me show you how it's done kind of thing, that kind of bravado that they likely emulated because they learned it from their dad and he learned it from his dad and those types of things. And the stereotypes exist for a reason because the instances of these things happening, being said, being done still exist. So I don't want any of us to have our heads in the sand. It's still a problem. Sexism in atheism can still be a problem and often is.
Yeah, and I think, though, that you know, how you talk about it, you know, you're sort of chuckling and you say you've seen men catcall. But I don't think, you know, and there's no fault of yours that you were born a male and you do not know what it's like to be on the other side of seeing what that woman is experiencing as she's being catcalled. My daughter just this week, she lives in Toronto and is going to university, and she texted me and she got harassed and catcalled all week long, more than I have in 47 years. Like it's crazy what she has to go through as a 20-something-year-old woman in a city with a lot of her classes. She's in mechanical engineering, so they're majority of men, and she's just heartbroken. She said, do I have to cut my hair and become ugly so that the men won't, harass me? Like, she's just in tears about it. And
well, I certainly wasn't trying to make light,
No, I know.
I think it's more of like a knowing, like I understand. I mean, I know what guys can be like. My wife works in the medical profession, which is a very hands-on thing, patient care. And these guys come in and it's amazing the things they think they can say and do and get away with. So I hope you understand the spirit from which I was coming.
No, I know. And you're, like I say, there's nothing that you guys can ever, just like you'll never know what it's like to give birth. There's nothing that you could ever know what it's like to really experience this harassment and this kind of thing that we have to go through. So I don't know, maybe there's some kind of a way that we could do some type of a therapy that men could go through and experience it in a way,
How do I then, as a guy, become part of the solution?
This is Karen. I think one of the ways that you can deal with this issue is to call it out when you see it. If Wendy's daughter is walking down the street and somebody's catcalling, et cetera, and you see that, you go up to the person and say, that's inappropriate, don't do it, I think her daughter's going to feel better. And I think we're reluctant to step out and call somebody on their behavior and saying, that's just not appropriate, don't do that. And I think we could all, men or women, do that more often when we see something happening to intervene.
Abby Hafer, you got anything on this?
Well, I like the idea of intervention as well. What I really wish, of course, is that in some of those workplaces where there's, construction guys catcalling, man, if one of the other guys on the construction site would call him out. But here's the interesting thing. That actually will be difficult for a guy to do because these are the guys he works with. These are the guys he may depend upon. And that can actually be a very difficult dynamic. And all I can say, as has been talked about already, is think about how much harder it is for women who are stuck walking by that construction site every day. My daughter wound up injuring her knee because she went out for a run and somebody catcalled her and it distracted her and she almost ran into somebody and tried to avoid them and then tripped over a curb. And this was, actually this endangered her having this happen. So it's harmful spiritually, but it's harmful physically as well. And it means there are a lot of times when there are things that women won't do or places women will not go because it is either hostile or dangerous. And I think any time that a guy can call fellow men out on that, or indeed if some other woman can call men out on it, I think that would be great. And even, this is the important part, even if the catcallers don't stop, and even if the intervener gets an earful and is called a wuss, if the person who's the victim hears someone standing up for them so they don't feel alone or isolated, I think that's a really important thing.
Has that ever worked? I mean, some guy at a construction site catcalls someone walking by. Has the person walking by ever just turned around and thrown themselves at the construction worker? I mean, I've never really understood. Here I am. It just never happens that way. The guy's driving by with the windows down and they're whistling out the window. Has that worked on anybody? I think not.
I think it's more of a tax on being female. It's that the guys feel they own the space, and if women want to pass through it, it's like toll collection. They'll decide who gets to just pass through unmolested or uncatcalled, and who they're going to call out to just because it gives them kind of a perverted thrill. They feel they own the space. I don't think they're even trying to get laid. They're often way up on the top of a building someplace, and, it's not going to work in terms of having sex, but it is their way of dominating the space, and that's what it's about.
Karen?
Yeah, I was walking down the street in Rome with two women, and I did not speak Italian, but I knew exactly what the men behind were saying. And they were kind of, talking about us and harassing us a little. And I turned around in English, and I won't repeat what I said here, but just confronting them, they totally stopped. They gave it up. So I think people do need to stand up for themselves. I think they need to stand up for others and call out that type of thing.
Let's talk about the word feminism. I mean, I haven't lost enough subscribers today, so let's go ahead and throw the word out, right? Because you can already hear people are starting to stomp out of it if they haven't already. I like the word feminism. I just think it works. I hold to the definition of it. I support it. It's, I wrote a blog about it, I think back in 2012, 2013. Like, I like it. I like feminism. It's how I like to frame the equation. Can a man be a feminist? And what's your perspective on the term, on the framing of equality using the term feminist, or do you use something else?
I think men definitely can be feminist. My husband, for example, he took off a month after our son was born, and he never did that with his earlier two children, but he respected that I was working full time. He took a month off, and later on when I got a promotion, he decided not to take one because it would be a better balance if he didn't. So I think there are a lot of men out there who are supportive of gender equality, of women's rights, et cetera. And I hope my son, and I believe my son is one of them too.
This is Abby, and I'm going to go along with Karen. I would say that absolutely a man can be a feminist. Sometimes, and Karen actually gave a good example, sometimes it's easy to be a feminist in principle and much harder to be a feminist in fact. if it might mean not taking a certain promotion or moving across the country for your wife's job or something like that. So there are ways in which a man's commitment may be tested. I'll put it that way. But certainly, in principle, in believing that women should have, that access to whatever people want should not be limited by gender. I'm sure that lots of men are feminists. And then the real question is going to be, how does that work out in real life?
Wendy Marsman, anything to add?
Yeah, earlier you might have heard the coyotes. We have a group of coyotes outside my window. So if it might.
Oh, no, I love it. And I wish I'd had him for the Halloween broadcast. That'd have been fantastic.
I'll open my window if they come again. They're pretty loud.
Okay. All right. Great.
So they were barking right when you were talking about the cat calling, so it was appropriate. So I think for me, I'm starting to see feminism, even for women, actions speak louder than words. So if somebody actually acts as a feminist, to me, then they can start to call themselves a feminist. Do they put women's rights as equal as to men? Are they not sexist? Do they do the dishes equally? Do they buy the groceries equally? Do they share all the duties in the house equally with the wife? Then that man, I think, would have the right to say, or people would say, yeah, he's a feminist. I think it's the kind of thing that should be said about somebody instead of that person claiming it. Because I found somebody on one of my Facebook posts, a man who was quite outspoken, and he claimed to be a feminist, and yet then afterwards he was incredibly rude and bullying. And I thought, no, he's not a feminist at all because of what he said. And so I think that's where I'm coming down to is men could be feminists. They just have to show it.
Yeah, put up or shut up. I get that. What about those who frame feminism with, they'll go cherry pick the most toxic examples, very public examples, as if feminism is all one sort of star chamber. Everybody's doing the same thing the same way. Feminists are this. We see the headline already. Feminism is that. How do you address that for those who bring up sincerely legitimate concerns that this person is waving the banner of feminism and they're actually not a good person? How would you respond, any of you?
Well, I think you have to look at, there's always going to be outliers. There's always going to be people who go too far. I got kicked off a Facebook group called No Gods, No Masters, Atheist Feminists, because I had written a blog saying we need more secular men. I'd done it with somebody else. And I started to have a conversation with them. And they were like, we don't need men, that kind of stuff. They were very extreme. And I tried to explain, look, we wouldn't have gotten the right to vote if men hadn't participated, if men hadn't supported. And the Equal Rights Amendment, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, we wouldn't have gotten it. And they just totally mocked me and said, oh, is she going to go make them cakes? And kicked me off. So there's going to be extremes on every side. But I think if you can define the word as saying, look, do you want gender equality? You want to have women have any job they want to and be paid the same as men? Do you want to share duties in the home? And just list those things and say, that's how I define the word. That let's discuss that definition. Whether the outliers on either side, I think you just get a lot further.
It's the same thing when I see somebody acting in a tremendously tragic way who is an atheist activist. I'm like, that's them. They might be waving, they might call themselves an atheist, but this is not an indictment of every other person who is a non-believer in the supernatural or in gods, right?
Exactly.
Anybody else?
I'm going to follow up on what Wendy was saying about how maybe the title feminist should not be claimed by a man, but rather should be said about them. Another way of going about that, because we are all imperfect and we're all going to screw up from time to time, and a lot of assumptions are very deeply embedded. It's kind of like walking through a field of burrs. You're picking them off for the rest of your life. You can say something like, I abhor sexism, rather than saying, I'm a feminist or I'm not a sexist. If you say, I don't like sexism, that's a way of saying, I don't like the fact that some of those deep patriarchal attitudes may have rubbed off on me, but maybe they did. but I'm working on doing it right. And I'm working on supporting equality. And, in the same way, rather than saying, for instance, I'm not a racist, which is something that's nearly always incorrect, you can say, I abhor racism. And that can be a true statement, and it indicates that you're continuing to try and work on it, or at least it can. So that may be one way of framing it that actually works and is honest.
Mm-hmm. Talking here with Karen Garst, author of Women Beyond Belief, Abby Hafer, who is the author of The Not So Intelligent Designer, and Wendy Marsman of the Women Beyond Belief podcast. You've been very generous with your time, but I'm going to steal just a few minutes more. Can I do that? Because I'm just enjoying the conversation so much, and I think our listeners are engaging as well. As people leave religion, from your perspective, how much of the patriarchal baggage is still sticking around? The perceptions about men and women, especially in the era of Trump, right? For Trump, women are objects. They are sort of accessories to his lavish, toxically masculine life, if I may. What are your perspectives on, the perceptions about women in the United States right now?
This is Karen. I'm very concerned. As I said earlier, I got involved because of the Hobby Lobby decision. But what we see now is we have a group of 30 men sitting around a table and deciding about reproductive rights. We have Trump telling companies that they don't have to provide certain forms of birth control to women if they don't want to. And obviously, they're not doing that with Viagra. I mean, it is very disconcerting what's happening right now.
Do you see that panel in Saudi Arabia? All the men deciding that women would now be allowed to drive. But just the irony is so thick you can drive a truck through it. Wendy Marsman, anything to add here?
Well, I'm a Canadian, so I can't speak much for what you guys are going through.
Talk about us. I know you want to. I know you look down at us and wonder if the entire nation has gone insane.
Well, I just keep telling people, come move up here. We've got a prime minister who walked in the Pride Parade. He's a pretty cool guy, I think. So,
can you sneak us over the border, at least on weekends? We'll
right.
Come up, we'll all hang out. You can pat us on the head and tell us it's going to be all right,
just
Wendy.
Bring your warm clothes and winter boots.
Yeah.
It's a bit scary to see what's going on down there. I'm not surprised at all, because being from the fundamentalist religion and realizing I used to think like that, honestly, 8 years ago, I probably would have voted for him, because you vote for the person who claims to be a Christian. You vote for the person who's going to be anti-abortion. You vote for the person who's going to be anti-LGBT, because that's what the church believed. And so even if he's not a nice person, that's sort of behind beside, you don't really look at that. You look at what do they stand for, and okay, that goes in line with my church. I'm going to go ahead and vote for them. So it's that same kind of thing. You turn your brain off and you just obey and you just submit. So
Wendy, do you think like your pastor, your father, your husband at the time, do you think they would have admired Trump and his bravado?
Oh, I'm positive my ex-husband would have voted for him, for sure. That's a thing. All the Christians would be voting for them. It's scary to think, but, I helped raise a generation on the mission field. I helped teach at the mission school. And just a couple of weeks ago, I saw a post from one of those missionary kids, and he was totally pro-Trump. And I just shuddered, and with regret, that I was part of that, raising people to just blindly follow it, because God puts our leaders there and we better obey them no matter what. It's very scary. So to me, I think the religion is very linked to why he's in there.
Abby Hafer?
Well, I'm going back to your comment about toxic masculinity, actually, because I tend to think that it is masculinity, I think, can actually be a fine thing. And I don't think that this is a toxic form of masculinity. I think that it is a toxic form of adolescence and arrested development. So you have somebody who is, maybe at about the intellectual and sexual maturity and emotional maturity of, say, a 12-year-old.
You're being generous, Abby.
Very often in our society, those guys are considered pure. It's considered to be better that way, to have sort of a 12-year-old's outlook than to actually grow up. So I would say that it's more like toxic perversion rather than toxic masculinity. I think that an adult masculinity is a perfectly fine thing to have, and it shouldn't really be confused with this sort of idiotic arrested development that we are seeing far too much of.
Any other thoughts before we call it a day? Anybody have anything about, what you do, your sort of thoughts on the conversation we've had over the past hour plus? Anything we missed?
Well, this is Karen. Everyone who's listening, speak out. And particularly if there's women involved who are listening, talk to other women. I always welcome guest writers at my blog. If you've got a story to tell, let me know about it, because we need to stand up and we need to have more women speaking.
Wendy Marsman?
Yeah, I'd second that with Karen. Just more women to just have more confidence to speak up. I was very shy to speak up even a year ago. And as I have come out of the closet as an atheist, it's very empowering and it's validating. And to me, talk therapy is very helpful for that PTSD and that religious trauma syndrome that so many of us have to deal with. And being able to talk it out is actually very therapeutic. So either talking it out on a Facebook group or on a podcast interview or creating a blog, anything like that, I really recommend that for women as they're leaving religion.
Abby Hafer.
I continue to be interested in what you were saying earlier about how much sexism may stick. Again, I'm going to use kind of that sense of walking through a field of burrs. We're likely to be picking this stuff off of our clothing forever, but it's still a worthwhile thing to do. And so as we run up against our own bad attitudes or bad attitudes in others, we're just going to have to deal with the fact that it's going to be a lot of work to get this done, and that's okay.
One thing I sure would like to see more of, I'd sure like to see us talking to each other instead of yelling at each other. It's like the experience Karen had when she went into the forum or the comment section. And we've all been guilty on the internet. It certainly is. It's an easy knee jerk to have where we tar and feather, we go after someone else, we're trying to win, we stop listening. I mean, we've all, I think, in some instances been guilty of that. But it sure would be nice if we talked to each other, especially online, more like we might speak to each other over coffee somewhere, eye to eye, face to face, human to human, seeing each other in 3 dimensions. How much time would we save? How much time would we not waste if we saw each other as flesh and blood human beings and approached each other more charitably? And then whenever we found something that was genuinely toxic, we genuinely did encounter an enemy, then we know that time and those opportunities were not wasted.
Yeah, for me, I think I do have arrested development too. In the church, I didn't learn a lot of good skills in how to make friends, because you walk into a church building with 100 people and automatically you're supposed to be friends with them. You don't learn a lot of friendship skills or how to engage correctly and navigate when you disagree. You're all supposed to disagree. You all put on a smile and your Sunday clothes, and there's not a lot of authenticity. So I find myself flying off the handle quicker. I find I'm surprised by the anger that I have, that I was never taught how to release correctly when I was in the church. So I think some of that maybe, I'm only speaking for myself, but I that might be some of the case of why online discussions can really go off the rails quickly.
My problem is I just have a high snark factor. Somebody says something and my sarcasm gear just kicks in, and it's a reflex to not use it. It's just my own fault, my own lack of restraint. I'm sorry. Did someone else want to jump in?
I used to post to a lot of Facebook groups, atheist Facebook groups, and it just took a lot of time. But my tactic was when somebody said something, I said, "What would your mother think of that?" And it got the dialogue going. And I did find out 3 or 4, conversations back, people would say, well, I guess I'll take a look at what you wrote, because they hadn't even read the post to start out with. They were just reacting to a title.
This is Abby. I'm going to also interject here that a lot of times we are told that there are these studies out there showing that people who believe certain things are only going to double down if you present them with facts or if you try to argue with them. but it has been my experience that actually a person who is doing something that is well presented and is brave can actually have an effect. Are you going to convert every fundamentalist? Are you going to convert every sexist to feminism or whatever? No, not everyone. But first of all, you may convert their children. And second of all, I do think that over time, people can slowly take new things on board and change. I remember going to an atheists convention a few years ago, and Greta Christina was speaking, and she just said, a quick show of hands in the room. How many of you came out of fundamentalist religion or religion in general, at least in part, through logical argument or as a result of logical argument? And most of the hands in the room went up. So there really is something for being sort of polite and sticking to your guns, but doing it in a factual and polite and brave way. It actually does work. And I know there are people who will say it doesn't, and I'll say it won't work every time. But it's worth doing. And I think it's worth doing online as well as doing in person and in writing.
Well, Abby, you got three others here on the show who were reasoned out of their faith at some point in our lives. We're living examples. And I think, I don't want to speak for the other two, but we may envy you, Abby. I mean, you didn't have to navigate these waters. You were a skeptic so much earlier. I thought donkeys could talk till I was in my mid-30s. I envy you, Abby Hafer.
I know.
Yeah. Karen Garst, author of Women Beyond Belief and the admin of faithlessfeminist.com. Abby Hafer, the author of The Not So Intelligent Designer, and Wendy Marsman of the Women Beyond Belief podcast. Thank you so much for giving of your time. I know you have very busy schedules, but it's been an honor to have you as part of this panel today to talk through so much of these important issues. We'll keep kicking out there and can hopefully continue to not just speak, but also listen to each other and pursue the best ideas. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you, Seth.
Thanks very much, Seth.
Thanks, Seth.
Join me next week as we explore the satanic panic of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. It's an audio podcast that's going to release, as always, Blog Talk Radio, iTunes, and all the standard podcast apps out there. And then a video version of the speech will release to YouTube. Get ready to go down the rabbit hole and experience just a taste of the satanic panic. That's next Tuesday, and I will see you then. Take care.
Follow The Thinking Atheist on Facebook and Twitter. Watch dozens of original videos on the Thinking Atheist YouTube channel. And visit our website for resources, links, contact information, the editor's blog, and more. thethinkingatheist.com.